Hey, what's up? My name is Ari. I'm a product designer and developer based in Sydney, Australia. And in this one, we're going to discuss and learn about UX auditing, analysis, and evaluation. We're going to learn what UX auditing and analysis is, and then we're going to go hands-on with a real-life project running an evaluation on one of my favorite companies, GYMSHARK. I don't work for GYMSHARK, and I'm just using them as an example in order for all of us to learn some of this process. What is UX auditing or analysis? It's not a content auditing piece. That's different, and we'll talk about that in a different video. This one's more about the general user experience auditing and inspection of a platform. As UX experts, we put ourselves in our users' shoes in order to run user experience audits of our apps, trying different flows and use cases for ourselves. The outcome is our subject matter expert review and recommendations that includes recording and eliminating any usability issues, inconsistencies, language, UI bugs, misuse of any common design patterns, or any other issues that we find. Having good experience and understanding of common best UX practices, business and the customers are important to this process, since this process relies solely on our judgment as UX experts. So in basic terms, you look for issues, prioritize them based on their impact and severity to the business and to the user, and recommend solutions and prioritize those in order to get implemented. So now let's talk about the why. We do inspections like this early on in a project in order to sanity check our work. It helps us understand the product better, eliminate issues early on, especially the lower hanging fruits that are quicker to find and easier to fix, and easily clear out a whole bunch of bugs, usability issues, and other things that we find along the way. It's also relatively cost effective, as it doesn't necessarily require the full setup of something else like a full-on user testing session, as it solely relies on you as a UX expert, your understanding of the product, and the research that you conduct along the way. Because of that, it does mean that you might end up missing some of the issues or overlook some of them, but at the same time, you get to eliminate some as well. So when do we run a UX auditing? Basically, every time you approach a new project, it makes sense to run a UX audit in order to learn about the product, its issues, and to also provide a fresh perspective on the product. It's also useful to run an evaluation like this when you don't necessarily have the budget for something bigger like a user testing session. As we talked about this before, this is a little bit more cost effective and less time consuming than that. Although this isn't as effective as a user testing session, it's still a helpful exercise to run in order to evaluate your product. Now let's talk about the how. Although there are many ways in order to run a UX evaluation audit, I've put together my own template that has made this process a lot more simple for me, and I'll share that with you guys as well. The template itself is a mixture of Norman Nielsen's group's Heuristic evaluation framework and this other framework that I found online a while back. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find it in order to cite it in this video, but if I do find it, I'll definitely add it into the footnote. And the combination of these two frameworks together has created a really streamlined way for me that I've ran in multiple projects quite successfully. So here's what you'll need in order to conduct a successful UX evaluation. You're gonna need a good persona. Your persona needs to define your user's goals, common terminologies used in the field that you're working within, a good understanding of the demographics for your personas, the language that people use in order to use your platform, the level of expertise they might have, and it'd be good to understand at least a good understanding of their user journeys and user flows that they might go through in order to achieve a task using your product. Next, you need a good understanding of your company's or client's business goals. You need to understand the terminology that they use within their business, their financial goals, their product goals, milestones, and any other metrics that you can get your hands on would be helpful. Then you need to conduct a competitor analysis. This includes looking for items like industry standards, the language that is used industry-wide, understanding of their approach, understanding of their marketing tactics, understanding of their users, and understanding of their user flows. And another piece that would be very helpful during conducting this analysis is a good understanding of UX best practices. This includes things like messaging and communication, consistency across the platform on messaging, language, and design patterns, typical sanity checks, user flows, and more. The Norman Nielsen's Heuristic evaluation framework provides a good list of items to look for within running a UX audit like this, and I will include a link to that article down below, and that's always a good starting point for us to approach this topic. On top of the 10 items that's included in Norman Nielsen's usability heuristics for user interface design article, I'll also include a list over here that could also be helpful in your audits. As you're going through your audit, I would look for other items like broken links and images, UI and branding inconsistencies like fonts, colors, tone of voice, messaging, components, etc. I would look for user flow and customer journey issues. I would look for outdated content, usability and accessibility issues. I would also create a checklist of business goals and see whether they are getting implemented on the platform or not. On top of all that, access to any data or analytics that you might have would be extremely helpful. And the very last thing is your legal compliance. I would make sure that the legal compliance is also getting implemented properly. Think of this list and the Norman Nielsen's group list as starting points, and depending on your project, you want to add your own items to this list. Now that we know what UX auditing and evaluation is, let's talk about the project itself. So let's do a self-assessment of myself since I'm going to be running this exercise. We're conducting an evaluation on an activewear company called GYMSHARK, which is kind of like Nike or Adidas. Although within my experience, I haven't done any work on a clothing or activewear products. I have, however, had plenty of experience with typical e-commerce projects. As a matter of fact, I've been exclusively specializing in e-commerce for the last 5 years of my career. And I've gained a lot of experience understanding things like what makes a great user experience within the e-commerce world, customer shopping patterns and customer journeys, how to funnel people in and out and drop-off rates during those funnels, customer browsing and purchasing behavior on mobile versus desktop, common e-commerce best practices, conversion rates, sales funnel, and a lot more. However, let's just say that I didn't have any experience designing an e-commerce platform in the past. So if I didn't, I'd start by Googling e-commerce best UX practices. I'd look at examples of user journeys that I can get my hands on. I'd look at customer behavior. I'd look at any data points within the company and note down or record points of problems and opportunities like bounce rates, major flow drop-offs, customer segments, and anything else that I can get my hands on. Let's talk about why I chose GYMSHARK specifically to run this audit on. I wanted to approach a bigger company that most likely has a good design team and established UX on board, so that first of all, we could challenge ourselves. Second of all, to showcase that even bigger websites have their own issues. Third, I actually really like the brand GYMSHARK and I like what they do and what they've achieved so far. And fourth, this is more likely a realistic scenario for you as a UX designer. You don't always approach brand new projects. A lot of the time, or most of the times, you actually join a pre-established team and you have to run or conduct one of these within that team or for that client. The competitors that I looked into were two directs, so Nike and Adidas. These competitors also create their own products and they're also in the sports and activewear category. And I also looked at one indirect, a company called shortcomings, that sells other people's products, but it's still within the clothing e-commerce. The items that I looked at as a part of my competitor analysis within the e-commerce world were common design patterns used across these platforms, navigation, customer journeys, search and filtering. What do these companies do well and what things could we improve upon? We'll unpack two main customer journeys, even though there are many more within the e-commerce world, especially this one. And after that, we'll grab one of those two and run our audit based on that in order to manage the time of this video. Both of our customer segments are going to be within the window shopper category. A window shopper would be someone who's not necessarily ready to make a purchase, but they're browsing the website to get an idea of the range that the website might be providing, to do some price and product comparison between this website and other competitors, others. And I broke the window shopper down into two separate categories, a casual browser and someone who knows what they're after. So a casual browser would be someone who's generally browsing the website. They'd be casually looking around, most likely will use the navigation on the site in order to navigate their way around the platform, will most likely use more filtering than search since they don't know exactly what they want, but they have an idea, are also more likely to stay on a single page and read through it longer and more thoroughly than another user who's more in a hurry and knows exactly what they want. And typically they're less time sensitive, as in they have more time on their hands as they're browsing the website. The second category, the user that knows what they're after, they're probably sort of ready to make a purchase, and at the moment they're just comparing products and prices between potentially your platform and others. They already know what they're after, or at least have a general idea of what they're after. They're more likely to use the search and filter widgets on the website. They might want to save some items for later. They might want to share some of these items with other people as well. All right, let's go through the templates and the project itself. Every time I run a heuristic evaluation or a UX audit analysis, I create a template like this, and I'll walk you guys through that in just a second. The project itself is going to be the GYMSHARK.com website, and in order to manage the time of this video, I'm only going to be running the evaluation on the main navigation up here, including the drop downs, and on the homepage itself. It's not going to be a thorough evaluation, but it's still should give you guys a good idea to start with your own project. Back to the template, what I usually do, I plot out the pages or the widgets that I'm going to analyze. So in my case, it's the navigation and the homepage. I number them accordingly. So navigation is 1 and 01, and you'll see why the numbers come in handy in just a second once we start filling this out. Homepage is number 2. Then I take some screenshots of the platform, paste them on this space provided on the left-hand side, and record the findings on the right-hand side and mark the two in order to get an understanding of what I'm actually referring to. Further down the page, I have a section for comments and questions. This is regarding any questions that I might come up with during the analysis. I do this for all the pages that I go through. And at the very end, I have a recommendation system. The recommendation basically has a guide and a key. I score my findings based on their usability severity and the effort that it requires to fix the issue. On the left-hand side, I provide the issue. I provide a very high-level suggestion. These are not final design ideas. These are just more of a high-level approach towards that idea. And then based on the severity and the ease of fix, we provide a priority on when it should be fixed or how fast we recommend that it should be fixed. One last note, I'm also only doing this for the desktop version of the app, but you'd want to do both desktop and mobile when it comes to running a UX audit in the real world. All right, now let's get started with our analysis. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'm obviously going to go to the GYMSHARK.com website. And as we said, we're going to start with a navigation and work our way down. One thing to keep in mind about e-commerce is that the nav is essentially the most important part. It's how people start their journeys. It's how they find their items and essentially browse their way into a purchase. So the first thing that they've done, which is a very typical e-commerce pattern, is to separate the less important items and pushing those to a smaller real estate at the top, separating that from the main navigation and all the essential tools, which is great. I have a great customer segments over here, so I know where to go, whether I belong to any of these categories over here. Then they have their website notifications and messaging right down here. So fairly typical, and you could basically see a very similar pattern with someone like Nike or Adidas as well. Very, very similar pattern, except for the fact that these guys have moved their messaging to the very top instead of the bottom. Both are fine with me, so I have no complaints there. The issue, and potentially the biggest issue that I have, however, with the GYMSHARK website, notice how in the secondary navigation at the top over here, I'm still based in the United States. Even though I went to GYMSHARK.com, it should be able to detect my location and send me to Australia from the get-go. And I'll show you how that works. So for example, if I come to Nike.com and just type in Nike.com, it automatically detects where I'm at and it takes me to the AU section. It's the same with Adidas. It takes me to the .com.au gymshark.eu. It basically forwards me there. And other websites like Culture Kings, sometimes they don't do that. They want to give that option back to the user. So I went to the .com and they have this pop-up that says that they've detected that I'm in Australia, and they ask me whether or not I want to go to their Australian website, which I'm going to go with Take Me There. So that's a really big issue over here. And this is the first issue that we're going to plot into our template over here. The first thing that I'll usually do is I take a screenshot of this navigation at the top. I then come to my Figma. I bring that screenshot in like this. So I've got navigation default. I plot a point on the placement that I'm actually talking about, which for me is this location selector up here, and that's 1.1. Remember how we said we want to number our pages? That's because the first number over here references the first number on my dot point as well, and the 1.1 just basically references the order that I'm going to place this within my findings. And within my findings, I basically plot a point that says location detection. Currently, I'm based in Australia and the site doesn't automatically detect and change my location. This can cause issues with product availability, shipping rates, and currency in general. But that's the first issue that I found with GYMSHARK. The second issue that I found over here is that my account, you can see it that we have it at the top in the secondary nav, and we also have it at the bottom. Even when I start scrolling down the page, it's not like one of these actually hides. So I'm not really too sure behind the reasoning of repeating the exact same widget, as this could potentially cause confusion. And they're also named differently as well. So one's called My Account and the other one's called Account. But you can see that at the bottom left-hand side, they both take me to the exact same link. And when I click on it, I came across this other issue where it doesn't necessarily encourage me enough to open an account. We got to keep in mind that providing all of this information, not everyone is comfortable with that. Also, it's another username and password that I need to maintain as a customer. So making this page, especially the create an account page, a little bit more exciting and plotting out the advantages of having a GYMSHARK account, I would hypothesize that it would convert much better for them. But that's just a hypothesis. So going back to my Figma file, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to take a screenshot of that, which I already have. I already have my navigation. I'm just going to basically plot a point. So 1.2, because this is the second item. So I'm going to bring in my account repetition note and how I think it shouldn't necessarily be repeated. Also, the little comment that I had about the page. I'll just plot a point in order to reference what I'm talking about. And whoever that's picking this up now, they can reference the two and go from there. So for the next piece, as I was going through the navigation over here, especially under the different customer segments and then accessories, I realized that under accessories, they have underwear plotted over here, where under men's, for example, underwear is not necessarily under accessories, even though it was when I was under the accessories tab, but rather it's within their products. Now, I kind of understand why they've done that. It's the same with the women's. Underwear is on the products, not on the accessories. I do understand that they've probably done some cart sorting or tree testing and realized that people look for underwear on the products rather than accessories when it comes to the men and women section, but they also wanted to include it in here to provide more exposure. But I would just leave a note that it could potentially create a little bit of a confusion, although I don't necessarily think that it's a big deal at this point. But I'd like some data. So for example, the tree testing in order to prove my hypothesis wrong, I guess, in a way. So going back to Figma, I would have screenshotted the navigation dropdown. So we've got the navigation for women, we've got the navigation for men, and then we've got the navigation for accessories. And going back to the top, we're going to plot point the accessories tabs over here, again, just to showcase what we're talking about as 1.3. And on the 1.3, I'm just going to basically write what I just mentioned previously. The next point I wanted to bring up, going back to their accessories tab. So notice how under men and women, they have new releases and must-haves. Under men's, they have new releases and must-haves as well. So my assumption is that when I click on this new release, it's going to take me to a page that's a full-on new release of all of the men's stuff, which, yes, I am correct on that. So that's good. But when I go under accessories, and they also have new releases over here, again, it's not necessarily a big deal, since when I click on men, it still takes me to a generic new releases page rather than an accessories new releases page. So as I said, it's not necessarily a big deal. However, it could potentially be confusing, but because of the fact that they're providing the ability to filter or to jump to a specific category, that's potentially okay. The only problem that I have, however, is that the accessories filtering or categories are not easily found down here. And if I click on all accessories, they do have accessories tab over here. So my assumption is that they should probably sort this by newest, and then I should have been taken to this page instead. But again, not the biggest usability issue over here. However, it is an issue and we are going to plot it on our sheet. So going back to our sheet, we got 1.4, which is our accessories plot points down here. And we're going to also note it down as it currently takes into a generic new release page. So that's another issue that we found so far. The next thing that I noticed with the GYMSHARK website was their search widget. As I mentioned before, the search widget within the e-commerce platforms, specifically ones that are more familiar to people. So for example, even though if I don't know too much about GYMSHARK, I would know that they probably sell things like socks, or I would know that they sell things like joggers. And this is how I can basically come over here and browse my way around. The problem, however, that I have with the search are a few. First of all, it's not as prominent as I'd like it to be. Since it's a fairly essential widget, there is not a lot of differentiation between this and all the other secondary widgets at the top over here. I would have liked it if this had a different design, potentially had the input box over here and just made it look a little bit more clickable. On top of that, the pattern that they've used, when I click on it, it completely takes me out of my current journey, which is not necessarily the best practice. But on top of that, in order to go back, I could, yes, click on this, but that's not really clear. Maybe we could have changed this logo to a close button. There is a close button over here. However, the close button also could be mistaken as a clear button. And I could basically prove this even when I type something over here. So like when I type in socks, you can see that the clear search and the close button are right next to each other, which makes the entire experience even more confusing. They're also missing out on a few good practices that are commonly used within e-commerce. Like one of them is to help the customer to search for things by providing a few most popular searches that people usually search for, or potentially introducing top purchased products or categories down here, especially because they're taking over so much real estate unnecessarily. And that was my first hypothesis, but also when I checked out the competitor websites, you can see that, for example, Nike had one of the better search patterns. They have the search box very exposed over here. It also interacts as I hover over it, which makes it a little bit more clickable, I guess, in a way. And once I click on it, you can see how I'm still within the same journey. So I'm not necessarily taken out of my journey. There's no shock factor. I know exactly where I was. I know where I am right now. I know how to close the search quite clearly by just clicking this. And as we mentioned before, they have some of their popular search terms, right? So if I type in shoe over here, there you go. You can see some of their featured products, but it also encourages me to press enter to go to the category page and start filtering my way down to the item that I want. The GYMSHARK doesn't necessarily do that. When I type in something like socks, it provides all of these socks over here, but there is no good way for me to filter through them, first of all, and second of all, because of the number of items that it's showcasing to me, it's less encouraging for me to come over here and press enter. And even when I do press enter doesn't necessarily work. On top of all of that, pressing escape on my keyboard also doesn't work, which are all fairly bad practices on an e-commerce website like this. So that's a lot of stuff with the search that I would point down. So going back to my Figma file over here, I'm going to provide a note on a search pattern. I'm going to take a screenshot of the search and I'm going to plot a point for the search pattern thing that we just talked about. I then am going to talk about the search helper. So that's that commonly searched, more popular items that we talked about. Then there's the keyboard accessibility piece that we talked about, the close button notes that we talked about, and we're gonna also plot all of them down here just to showcase what we're referring to. A couple of other items that I noticed as I was going through this website were, so let's just go back to the .com. If I click on the cart, even though I have nothing in my cart, it basically just says your bag is currently empty. It provides a checkout and a your bag buttons, but these could potentially just take me out of my current journey for no good reason. I mean, this is a fairly useless page for me to visit when there is nothing for me to check out. And there is also no point of seeing the total value of my cart since it's just empty. A better practice that they could have done over here was to provide a good empty state that encourages a purchase behavior, potentially take me to their top categories or using a cute illustration or anything that's more on brand for them in order to encourage me into a certain purchase funnel on the website. And that could increase the chances of converting me into a customer. Going back to our Figma file, we're going to note exactly those elements. So we're going to bring our cart down here. We're going to plot a number 1.6 and we're going to go up here and we're going to plot 1.6 up here as well. And the last note that I had for the navigation was the navigation in traction. As you can see, it's a really bulky piece of widget, especially on smaller screens. For example, 13-inch laptops or 12 or 10-inch iPads or tablets. The amount of real estate they're taking over here is quite massive. One thing that I would suggest on websites like this is when you scroll down, they could potentially get rid of the secondary navigation at the top over here, as I would imagine this wouldn't necessarily get used all the time by the user, and this would be the more important piece of the navigation. So hiding that would be a fairly safe bet in order to save a little bit of a real estate, but also allow to the main navigation at all times. And when I scroll up, you could potentially showcase that in case someone actually wants to access it. So that's the last thing that I'm going to plot down here as 1.7, which is on the nav itself, and I'm going to leave the notes down here as well. Now, in terms of comments and questions, I did have a couple. The first one was data. Are any of these buttons tracked? I probably would like to take a look at some data points in order to validate some of my hypothesis. There are tools that we could potentially use in the field of UX that help us do customer session screen recordings, things like Hotjar, Full Story, and a few more. And these tools are usually really helpful in order to understand how users use our platform and in order to point out any usability issues or bugs. Now, next, we're going to do the homepage. And to save time, I've already plotted the homepage, so I'll just walk you guys through what I pointed out over here. On the homepage, as 2.1, I've provided the fact that the title and the images are a little bit confusing. So what do I mean by that? The title at the moment, it reads All New Adapt Ombre. And underneath it, the smaller text reads New Knits, Same Confidence. It seems like a very, very marketing-driven title with not a whole lot of user value behind it. I mean, someone who doesn't necessarily know too much about the GYMSHARK brand wouldn't really understand what's going on over here. I would recommend to use better imagery to tell better stories and to use better titles in order to provide a little bit more information so that the user would understand what this block, which is a very important block, it's the hero of the homepage, is talking about. The second piece that I provided was around personalization. I've basically pointed out that although personalization is actually kind of difficult to do, especially for first-time users, at the moment, this section at the top, if I go back to the website, is very female driven. And on a website that potentially has a 50-50 or maybe one might be a little bit of a heavier user than the other, but you still don't want to necessarily segregate potentially half or a little bit less than half of your users. At the moment, the upper tile takes me to a women's product, and it would have been better if we potentially used some sort of a carousel over here or a double tiler, one for a female product and another for the male product. And that's what I've basically plotted over here. Or the ability to do personalization for returning customers and showcase what is most relevant to your user based on what you know about them. So for example, if they've signed up on the platform and you have a little bit of information on them, then you could potentially showcase products that's most relevant to them. Under 2.3, this is more of a storytelling / branding piece that exists over here. However, again, because of the type of the imagery that they've used and because of the wording that they've used, it's very difficult to understand what this whole tile is about unless I click on find out more, which then tells the story of this tile. But again, because of the way that it was implemented, it's difficult to understand that. Also, because of the lack of the customer segmentation at the top, I wouldn't really be comfortable with giving this so much attention and providing it as a second tile on the page, as it just doesn't necessarily flow well, going from shopping to someone's story and then back to shopping again. On the 2.4, basically suffers from the same issues as as 2.1. It has a fairly generic title and explainer text, which could be confusing, but the second note that I added over here is that there is too much focus on people's faces and less on the products, and there could always be a happy medium between the two. On the 2.5, I realized that they have both shop women's and shop men's section, and I just suggested to potentially move this a little bit further towards the top, potentially after the first tile, in order to create that customer funnel segmentation a little bit earlier on. Then they have these discounting and buy now pay later items down here, but because of the imagery and the text that they've used, it's kind of difficult to understand what this section is all about. 2.7, which is sign up to the newsletter sort of widget, it completely takes me out of my current journey. Again, this is a shopping journey into this other form, and it's kind of difficult to actually sign up since I have to provide my phone number. So I'd be interested to get some data on how much this actually gets used and potentially implemented differently. And the very last note that I provided is this is kind of like the company mission statement, and because of how it was designed and how wordy it is, I could almost guarantee that this doesn't really get read that much, and they could potentially break this out into a more graphic approach to make the section a little bit more attractive to read and better at storytelling. So once you analyze your pages like this, you want to start bringing in the recommendations page. And under the recommendations page, as I said, you're going to start bringing in all the points that you've captured. So the location detection, I'll bring that over here as an issue. I then rate it in terms of severity. So I've rated a severity of S4. That means that it's a bit of a usability catastrophe and it potentially must be fixed ASAP before it was even released, because this would cause a lot of confusion and frustration for the end user. And you can imagine a customer could come onto the website, add a whole bunch of things to the cart, and they're ready to check out. But at the checkout, they realize that this entire time that they wasted on the website, they were in a wrong region to begin with. In terms of an effort, I would say that this is more of a medium effort because of the fact that they already have all of these different regions available to them. It's just that for whatever reason, they're not necessarily detecting my location and push me there automatically. The way that I would come up with this number over here is usually through a collaboration with a developer who has a better understanding of how this widget was implemented, or having a conversation with the product manager in order to find out. And then based on that, I provide a very, very high level suggestion, as you can see over here, and I prioritize it. I prioritize this as a high priority to fix because of the impact that it would have to the usability of the end user, and also potentially the damage that it could cause for the brand. For the rest of the items, I've done the same. I'm just going to scroll through this, and if you want to pause the video to read through any of these, go ahead and do that. But essentially, it's just the exact same thing repeated. I grabbed the point that I made, I provided a very, very high level fix, I scored it, and then I prioritized it. And this goes for all the items that you saw up there. Essentially, this recommendation piece is the outcome. It's basically an actionable report that explains the issues and provides recommendations and suggestions for your client or your team. Ideally, you have an understanding of how much effort it takes to fix each of these particular issues. And as I said before, you can collaborate with a product manager or a developer to come up with the scoring and the ranking of the priority over here. The next step beyond this point is to collaborate with your stakeholders, product managers, or anyone else that's involved within your project in order to come up with a roadmap or a plan to implement and fix the issues that you found so far. Alright, this was getting started with UX auditing and evaluation, and I hope that you guys learned a thing or two from this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave a comment right down below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. It'd be awesome if you could go ahead and leave a like for the YouTube algorithm, and if you enjoy content like this, I try to make content like this once a week, so subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I'm also trying to be more active on Instagram, and I create smaller bite-sized tutorials over there, so follow me on Instagram if you haven't done so already. That's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.